All right, we're live. We're locked in, you're locked on, we are live, and this is Misaligned. Capitalism versus communism. One promises freedom, the other one promises fairness. But both are built on broken people's dreams, also broken nations. Tonight, we asked the question that everyone thinks they've answered. Which one actually works? Which one makes people thrive? And is it even about the system or about the people who run it? And this is good. In terms of today's conversation, it's myself and Jab, and I imagine this is probably one of those ones that's been coming to a head for a while because we've had lots of multiple conversations about parallels and lots of ancillary areas that it was inevitable that we'd end up having this conversation to discuss these two concepts. There's a few key areas that I think we can cover in today's topic, but maybe we can start with that. Just generally, maybe starting off with what our definitions are of them and what we generally think. What do you think about that, Jab? What are your thoughts and opinions about capitalism and communism, and which system do you think actually wins?
Yeah, so I think I have got a very simple framework. The classical definition is that socialism. So you've got the distinction I think is around who controls the means of production. Is it individuals or is it the common or the society? So if it's an individual, then we're talking about capitalism, and if it's the community, it's socialism or communism. That's kind of how I understand it broadly. Which system is better? I think that we can explore this, but in general, I think that capitalism is a good system for producing or generating wealth. But it's not good at obviously distributing the wealth. Now, you need socialism, I think, to distribute the wealth. So I think if you've got capitalism, and so you can mix and match, and I kind of think is what a country like China has done. Because if you leave capitalism on its own, you're going to end up with human suffering. That is just the inevitable result, because it's a system that is based on greed, in my understanding. And if you don't control human greed, there's just no end to it, because human greed is insatiable. You can't fill it up. You can't satiate it. You can't. There's no end to it. So it will just go on forever, and therefore, it would mean that the individual, because remember we're talking about a system here that preferences individuals, so that individual is going to carry on becoming richer and richer and richer and richer, because it's a system of extraction. Somebody else is losing. If one person is getting richer, another person is losing. That's a good way to think about it, such that unregulated capitalism will end up producing vast inequality. So I think broadly that's kind of how I see it. How do you see it?
I think for me, it's an interesting view. I think capitalism, I agree with your definition as well, because capitalism fundamentally is a system that allows individuals to thrive. And then communism is a collective approach to delivering value or creating value within a society. I think both capitalism and communism have pros and cons. And this is probably where we're going to get to further on in the conversation around whether or not the pros and cons of capitalism outweigh the pros and cons of communism. So capitalism, wins out when you start thinking about where it provides value. Capitalism focuses on profit. That's the basic concept about capitalism. How do we maximize the amount of income that we can generate while minimizing the amount of effort you use to generate that income or value or revenue, etc., on an individualistic level? Communism is a slightly different approach. It's just basically talking about how everything is owned collectively, and then the state just controls the economy on behalf of all the people. So there's no sense of class or any distinction between the types of people that exist within a society or in the economy. But I think, and if you think about the hallmarks of capitalism, for example, you think about things like free markets, so the markets control themselves around what the prices are set at. You think about things like private property, so people own what they can, which could become excessive sometimes. The motivation is profit, which we've already slightly discussed. The state does not intervene in terms of controlling how people behave and the things that they do. And there's wealth inequality, which often emerges. It has to emerge essentially as a byproduct based off of circumstances and effort that people put into things. Communism, obviously, is slightly different. There's collective ownership, so everybody owns everything fundamentally. The planning of everything is done by the states, which we're going to come to this in a minute, I imagine, because it's like, well, who defines who the state is and what power do they actually have? There's no classes existing within the society as well. Private profit completely eliminated as a result of these other things. And more often than not, there's an autocratic system. There's a one-party state that tends to control this in practice because it's very difficult to employ communism in a multi-party state. Because by communism, you're ensuring that everyone is fairly uniform in terms of the decision-making and in terms of how things work. And then to have the consistent changes through people apply, through individuals or politicians, etc. Employing different gimmicks to get votes, it affects whether or not you can use communism as a system or a tool. I think for me, that's a big thing. But there's a video that you shared that I think I would really like to play. It's fairly reasonably long. If you're all right with that, you're all right if we walk through, if we play this video.
In America.
I think it's a really good video. I really liked it, and it was very, very informative. Fantastic. Let me play that now. I think it was a really good video that really talks about some of the. It's a bit one-sided, kind of focuses a little bit around on the anti-capitalistic perspective, but I'm happy sharing this because it just helps. So if we have a look, I'm going to share this video. So let me know if you can. Just let me know if you got sound. I think that's pretty important.
Now, to make people think in America is an extremely difficult job.
A heads up, this is Kwame Ture, who is he was a very renowned political activist, went to Howard University, brilliant man, who was challenging a lot of the narratives around how the world is to operate. So people actually was alluding to the fact that he possibly could have and or may have not been part of the Black Panthers, not necessarily important at this point. But this, I think, was a brilliant video that I think was a very good critique of capitalism as it stands. So I'm going to play this fair use, and then we can discuss it at the end of the video. It's fairly long, about 7 minutes. So if you're listening, just enjoy. Sit back, have a cup of coffee, and enjoy the video.
The difficulty arises from the fact that since we live in a capitalist system which seeks to exploit the people and therefore keep the people confused, the capitalist system makes the people think they're thinking when in fact they are not thinking. And it is extremely difficult to convince someone who thinks he's thinking that he's not thinking. Isn't it? But we must do it. It's our responsibility. Let me give you an example of how the American people think they think but don't think. If we took a poll of the American people and asked them what they thought about communism, would you agree with me that at least 90% of the people we ask in America would be against communism? 90%? And if we ask this 90% what is communism, would you agree with me that less than 0.2% can probably give us an intelligent, though not necessarily correct answer? Would you agree with me with this? Now let me ask you a question just between you and I. If you have an enemy, does it behoove you to know the enemy or not to know the enemy? That is to say, for example, if snakes are your enemy, does it behoove you to know at least what they look like or not to know what they look like? Thinking. Listen to this. The man or woman who hates communism the most is the man or woman who knows the least about communism. And what is even tragic is that the man or woman who hates communism the most, that is to say, the man or woman who knows the least about communism, is the man or woman who wants to know the least about communism. That is to say, snakes are my enemies. They come to bite me, and I don't even want to know what they look like. It's a stupid system. Because the system is based on exploitation, it confuses the people so that it uses the people for its further exploitation. Thus, the pigs who run the capitalist system come and yell, the communists are coming. The people grab the guns. Where? They go shoot. The communists are coming. Where? San Domingo. They grab guns. They go shoot. The communists are coming. Where? Vietnam. They grab guns. They go shoot. They don't know what the hell they're fighting, and are not even concerned with finding out. That's a stupid system. Stupid system. Stupid system. Stupid and backwards. Stupid system. We said the capitalist system is a stupid system. It must be. It has to be. It's based on exploitation. It's motivating for its profits. But a backward system. A system that motivates people just to do things for profit. One cannot have individual incentive unless one is given some material stimulation. It's a stupid and backward system. It's a system that has to be destroyed. If one looks at the material makeup of the society, one can see clearly how unjust the system is. Under the system, a few people own and control everything. The rest of the masses of people own nothing. And they are forced to work for these who own. And the more you work, the poorer you get. Of course, because the essence of it is exploitation. It must be based on exploitation. As you look at the stupidity, a quick glance at the system will show you how unjust it is. But the American capitalist system will have the people so confused, they're thinking, they don't even look properly at the capitalist system. Do you know that in this country, some people own all the coal that's to be found in the country? Now that's unjust, there's no question about it. In the first place, their labor didn't even put the coal there. You know, so they can't say that it was through hard work. No, it wasn't through hard work, you got it. And your grandmama didn't give it to you because she didn't bring none with her when she came here. You know what I'm talking about? As a matter of fact, she found it here. You understand? So I don't care who you bought it from, who you didn't buy it from. No one man, no true group of men can own the coal in the country. The coal must belong to the people and be used for the benefit of the people. Clearly. It's a stupid system. It is a backward system. It affects you as students. Of course it will affect you. It affects your brothers. They send them to war to die. They don't even know what they're dying for. Because this system is concerned with confusing the people, not letting the people think, because once the people begin to think, they will use their creative energies for humanity and not against humanity. And this indeed is to see the true tragedy of the capitalist system. The tragedy of the capitalist system is to be found in the fact that it takes human beings who think, in fact, they're working for just ends, but in fact, for unjust ends. But here, by doing this, the system clearly demonstrates to us that human nature itself is for humanity. Clearly, even when they come to take the youth and send them to Vietnam, they don't come before the youth and tell them the truth. We're going to rape the country. If there was a fight for justice, if they were fighting against communism, which is fine, and we're fighting for freedom, and this is why the people are mobilized, because the people will be mobilized to fight for justice. And look at the vicious system, lying to the people, sending the youth to believe he's really fighting for democracy, when in fact this youth is fighting against democracy. It's a backward and stupid system. It has to be overthrown. You may think it doesn't touch you. You may think it doesn't affect you. That's the job of the university here. It supports the balance of capitalism. Its job is to put you to sleep. That's what it's to do. That's exactly what it's to do. Let me give you a demonstration. This is my first time I've been to this university. I don't know any of you personally. Maybe some of you I've seen somewhere. But knowing the capitalist system, knowing you as students, knowing the world occupied by students of the capitalist system, I can make a statement about you sitting here before me and be absolutely correct. I can say that at least 90% of the university teach. All right, give me 85. Well, baby.
Just probably be laughing.
I understand your nervous laughter, but you think about it. You think about it. Especially the African students. You think about it. Your people suffer. Your people suffer in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, in Egypt, in Algeria, in Trinidad, in Jamaica, in Guyana, in Mississippi, in Alabama, in New York, in California, in Georgia, in Atlanta, in Athens. You had the chance to come back there. You have the chance to come and help them by acquiring knowledge which can be used for the benefit of the people to help serve humanity. What are the great and most noble cause can that be? What are the great motivation? And rather than you acquiring this knowledge which has been paid for with the blood of your people, you come here and you cheat. It's a vicious system. It's a stupid and backward system, and you cheat because you're motivated by the values of the system unconsciously. The system tells you that the smartest man is the man who does the least work and reaps the highest benefits.
I think that's a pretty powerful video. It's a really powerful video showing quite a lot of the criticisms of capitalism, and he did it in a very interesting way that covers that was able to cover the nuances that we often don't think about, whether looking at that from a practical perspective when you're looking at what's happening at the institutional level, as well as the almost the factory level, where students are being propagated through a system that continues to reward outcomes over the means to those outcomes, and the other aspects that he talked about how most of the criticisms of communism tend to come from a place of ignorance. And I agree with that, because I think the vast majority of people who say communism is a bad thing don't even know what communism is. It's a big issue. It's a challenge. And I think maybe we could start with that and then go into the three sections, as we tend to always do, and look and say, well, with capitalism, is it really freedom or is it fairness? What exactly is that predication within capitalism that people tend to focus on? Is it freedom to make decisions or to create the kind of outcomes that we want as individuals, which with Adam Smith's view of the invisible hand, where each person's individual self-interest leads to a collective good as a result or as a whole, or is it fairness, something that is fair, that gives equal, people the opportunity, or the equal opportunity? That's something that's good for us as a society, or is it bad if we take what Kwame was talking about into account? What do you think, Jabo? What are your thoughts about that? First of all, what are your thoughts about the video? I think it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts about the video.
Yeah, no, I think,
but also,
yeah, no, I think the video speaks for itself. I think it's an excellent critique of capitalism. And in groups, sometimes when I speak about capitalism, and exactly what he says there, which is that I get swarm of people who say, oh, he's a socialist, or he's a communist, and communism is only is a bad system. It's a system that just wants to give lazy people money and give them all of this and rewards hard work. And like you say, or like he said in that video, you're arguing with people who do not even know what socialism is or what communism is, right? And in fact, their only understanding of capitalism is simply what they've been told, which is that it's the only system that works. That is as much as you understand about capitalism. If you say to them capitalism was responsible, let's say, for the slave trade, or for colonialism, all of the things, all of the ills that we see in our society today, if you say that to them, they will not understand. So I think I'm happy to see that you're aligned here, and because like he said, it's a system that rewards. It's all about profit. And I'll give you a quick example. Let's take England, for instance, okay? So we haven't had any. You would be aware. Anybody who's listening to us, who is familiar with, who lives in England, would know that our waterways have now become like dumping grounds for sewage. Yeah. So, and why is that? So first of all, because the water system, transport, and all of those things were privatized by Margaret Thatcher back in. Okay, that's that's interesting. I can't read it because of my.
No, it's fine. You can carry on. I'll just putting it there for anyone who's watching who would be interested in the different differences between the different economic schools of thought. But you can go on.
Yeah. Okay. So we haven't built any infrastructures. We privatized these communal systems. So what do we have? The argument back then was you can't leave this sort of infrastructure in the hands of government because they are inefficient. So let's privatize it so that we will become efficient, right? I'm using this as an example because people also talk about, oh, capitalism gives you freedom. So, but let's stick with the efficiency for now. We will talk about freedom later on. So efficiency. So let's look at the efficiency. So since it's been privatized, what have we noticed? Fees have gone up, and when these fees go up, the money is used to pay shareholders profit, right? And the CEOs get very massive bonuses. So that's what happens. How about the quality? Well, I don't need to tell you any more about the quality because, like I've said, they're not dumping poo and sewage into the waterworks, right? So that's so much for efficiency. Have they invested in capital projects, which is to expand this, reservoirs, this sewage disposal system? No, they haven't done that because that is not going to bring about profit. And what is the driving force behind capitalism? It's profit, right? So they will strip down the whole assets. Whatever money they make from there, they just share it. When the system is completely broken, what do? They hand it back to the government and say, right, that's now your cup of tea. Yeah. So we've had 40, 50 years of that. That's one example. We can say the same thing. We can talk about the same thing with railway system in the UK. So the other day, my family and I were going to go to London, and I've got two kids, children, under 10, and we decided in the end to just put petrol in the car and drive because it was infinitely cheaper. It was going to cost us about, I think, $350 or so just on the train. And if I filled up with £80, I went and I came back and I still had extra, right? So now they're talking about air pollution and greenhouse gas and climate warming and all of those things. But in that decision, I had to make a decision that was economically viable for my family, which is it's cheaper for me to burn the fuel than go on the transport system, right? So again, and we have cancellations all the time. So, but again, they talk about efficiency. So that's another example that I can use in that direction. So, does capitalism bring about efficiency? We can make a judgment on that. We can look at American healthcare system. Yeah. So, healthcare costs are the number one reason that people declare bankruptcy in the US. And you can see the system there. It's completely broken because it's driven by profit. So you can go on and on and on and on and on, and you see that you confront one mythology, which is that privatizing things make them efficient. Okay, so that's one. And you mentioned freedom. What is this freedom that people talk about when they talk about capitalism? Because if you look at how Black people, for instance, were kidnapped and exported to the Middle Passage across the Atlantic Ocean to other parts of the world to be enslaved there and to work on plantation, there is no freedom there. And why did that happen? It was profit motivated. White people Europeans didn't just wake up and just thought, who can we hate? We hate Africans. For what reason? It wasn't because of that. It was just because they did meet a system of indentured slavery, which most civilizations have practiced, and they decided to just specialize it because they realized that they can make money. We can just make these people, put them on the plantation, not pay them a dime, and just work them like you work horses and donkeys and make profit from that. That was the motivation. So again, that's capitalism there, the logic of capitalism there at work. It's the same thing that happened when they came to colonize, Africa and all parts of the world. Again, it's for the same thing. It's profit driven. You can explain every single behavior or how the world has turned out the way it is by just looking at that logic of trying to maximize profit. So there is no freedom. It doesn't bring freedom. And when you bring it home here, you get the same thing. Because why do we have a better life quality in the US, in the UK, in Europe, and these places? It is because we exploit the rest of the world. The profit that we generate from there is used to subsidize the quality of life here. And if that system were to stop, we are not going to have that profit and that money. Therefore, the treatment that people had abroad, how we treated, the savages in these places, that is going to start to be implemented here in the UK against the citizens, because it's a hierarchical system, it's a class system, such that if there is no, as it is now, there is no money, things like the benefit, those are going to go away.
Yep.
You talk university tuition fees, right? Why do home students pay, let's say, 7,500 and a guy from Nigeria pays 2 or 3 times that amount of money? It's because the Nigerian is paying 3 times. So if you're paying 10K for tuition, he's paying 30K, right? He is subsidizing your tuition fee. Therefore, that's how you can pay 10K. If for any reason the UK cannot attract Nigerians and people, foreign students to come here, well, there are only 2 options. One, the home students start to pay the real fee, okay, or the university declares bankrupt, or it just has to make cost-cutting measures, such as cutting the number of courses that they do and retrenching staff and all of those things, and the quality of education will go down. So that is the capitalist system in a nutshell.
I've got some pushback on some of the things that you said. So for example, I go a little bit around. There's a high level pushback, but before we go, we can take some specific examples. One is about the railway example that you gave was a good one. So we've got systems that are highly inefficient and they are not the best. So railway in the UK is a good example. And this is where I think communism would fail, in that capitalism focuses on what the best possible outcome is for the individual as a supplier and the individual as a buyer is. So in economics, it's called the demand supply curve. You'd know this, but just for anyone who's listening that isn't aware of this. And then generally, you tend to increase the quality of a good or service based off of the demand for that good or service as well as the supply. So you increase the outputs, the number of units that you're producing, but also the quality of that thing.
Okay, how does that work when you have a monopoly? Because that's kind of what we've got, isn't it?
To a degree, but like in the UK, a lot of the railway services have been privatized.
Yeah, and when you say what is good for the individual, it's profit. Let's call that word, it's profit.
No, I'm not even talking about profit yet, because profit is on the side of profit comes after demand and supply meet, and then you have revenue, or you have a price, and then that profit comes off the back of the price. So, for example, there's some goods that we produce in the world that don't necessarily have as much profit. I'm thinking about a couple of examples of things that that have very low profitability. I can't think off the top of my head right now, but there are some goods that have low profitability, but are still being produced. It's not every single good that has high profits, and it's not every single good that's produced that does generate profits, especially when we're dealing with from the government perspective. I think for me, that's important to point out, that it's not everything that is focused on profits or the profit margin. And when I think about things like railway is a good example. So most people just care about, can I get to where I need to get to 90% of the time? And if 90% of people get to where they want to get to 90% of the time, they'll be satisfied with delays. They'll be satisfied with cancellations. They'll be satisfied with any other extra things that affect the other quality of service that they want, because people are often not bothered too much by 100% availability of railway. They're not bothered by. It's similar to things like mobile networks, for example. You're not going to get 100% network coverage across the country, but you don't really care. You want to be able to have 90% network coverage whenever you go, wherever you go. When you travel, you go on the road, you're driving down the motorway, etc. As long as you have network on your phone 90% of the time, generally speaking, people are happy. Now, a supplier wouldn't necessarily have to provide 100% of that under capitalism. But under communism, and this is the part that I have an issue with communism with, is that communism focuses quite a lot on inefficiencies. It's not a very efficient system. It doesn't determine what people are willing to accept, because everything in life is choices and trade-offs. The resources that you're putting into making sure you have 100% coverage in the country requires you to have resources that are not being put somewhere else. And communism by default doesn't allow you to determine what that price point is or what that resource shift is. That's one of the issues I've got with communism. The second thing is around the freedom piece. Oh, well, there was something about slavery, but I won't dwell on that a bit too much. We can probably talk about this in a separate topic, to be honest. But something about slavery and slavery having to do with hate. I don't think there's anything that I don't think slavery had to do with anybody hating anybody. If you think back into the past, as far back as Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, slavery has always been a thing. And people historically started slavery by enslaving their own. The weakest amongst them, the less socially mobile, the less connected, the more isolated, tended to become slaves. So I think there's something about that, but we can have a separate conversation about that. But there was a big thing that came out while you were speaking that crossed into my mind about communism itself. And that is communism something that works where we are economically as a world and a society, where we've developed to. So communism is quite useful when you're a small society, you're a small group of people, there are 20 of you, and you're living in the jungle. You got wild animals are all around you. At this point, there's no social class. We need to survive. We need to live. Would you agree with that? Just before I go on, would you agree with that? Would you agree that that is quite useful to have zero class when you're a very small group of, or relatively small group of individuals who are living in harsher environmental and economic circumstances?
Okay, so I think I think I would look at socialism or communism as an ideal. Okay, so something to aspire to. That's really where you want things.
There's a specific point I'm trying to get to, but before that, would you agree that it's more ideal to be more communistic or socialistic, probably even more communistic, when you have a smaller group of individuals living in a hostile environment where you're dealing, say, for example, 4,000, 5,000 years ago, there's no guns, there's no vehicles, etc. People are living in a village somewhere in the middle of the, wherever, the tropics, etc. It's probably better for them at that point to be more communistic. You're all the same social class. You all are all governed by a very specific group of individuals that make the decisions. No separation. Allocation of resources is done equitably, and work allocation is also done based on capability and capacity. It does make sense, doesn't it, at that point, to have a communist environment. Now, this is the point that I've come with communism. I've been thinking about this off the back of the video, off the back of previous conversations we've had in other episodes, that actually it makes sense for communism to exist in significantly lower or lesser evolved societies. As society evolves, in my view, the usefulness of communism begins to drop off. Communism stops being as useful or as important or as impactful the more that you evolve as a society. Once you have the basic safeguards, you have security, you have economy in terms of foods, in terms of goods, basic goods, services that are required to build clothing, shelter, etc. Those kind of basic amenities. You have a basic political structure around making decisions on what's important from a socioeconomic perspective, or even a sociocultural perspective as well. At that point, to me, it sounds like communism becomes redundant. I start thinking, the more I think about it, it's like communism is designed for a very, very primitive society rather than a more developed society. And I don't know, I'm curious to hear what you think about that, because when I look at it, it sounds like capitalism is a lot more useful and it's a lot more impactful when you have a more advanced society versus when you have a primitive society.
So I'm not sure about that. I mean, if you look at, let's say, China has a population of 1.3 billion people. I would argue that they run a communist model, and they have managed to lift nearly 1 billion people out of poverty, in the last 40 years. And if you look at, if you subtract Chinese contribution from the global total, poverty reduction has barely happened over the last 40, 50 years across the world. Why is that? Mainly because most of the rest of the world is capitalist, or following the capitalist model, which is in place, and superintended by the US and its allies, the Western world. So I think so. I like to think of it this way: where we want to be is communal, community. That's where communism takes its word from. I think you're thinking about the social, the total, as opposed to just a few people having so much wealth and then some people have very little. I think that's where you want to be. How might we achieve that? Well, like I started at the beginning of this, if you want to use a combination of capitalism and socialism to achieve that objective, I personally don't have a problem with it, as long as at the end of the day what you have is a system that guarantees the freedom, safety, that people have access to all of these necessities that you talked about in life. I think I just so I don't mind which system allows you to do that, but capitalism without regulation is a system that is going to cause human suffering. It will cause wars, because once greedy people start clashing, there's going to be war. There's going to be war. I don't agree that it brings freedom. I don't bring that it's an efficient system. It's basically a system where the most powerful takes it all and everybody else just hangs around. But I feel that in terms of human development, because we've gone beyond the level of well, I like to hope that we've gone beyond the level of basic animal instincts, which is that you just want to control this territory, and I think we've gone beyond that. We should have but beyond that level, I think where you want to see is that people stop caring about just themselves and care about the society at large. Yes.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. One thing I would disagree with you before I move on to the next section is I disagree that China is communist. I don't think China is communist at all. I think they pretend that they are, but they're just authoritarian, and not necessarily fascist. I'm not going to go that far to say that they're a fascist country, but I would say that they're far more authoritarian rather, and they utilize capitalistic systems to improve what you've talked about, moving the people out of poverty. Absolutely do not think that they're anything close to being communist in any category that you define it. There's a multiplicity of very wealthy individuals who control vast enterprises within China. They engage in international capitalistic society. There's a mix of state-owned and private enterprise within the country as well. And it just, I don't see anything that tells me about that. Even the economy is market-based. So I don't see anything that tells me that they're communist, really, apart from the word that they've got the CCP in control of the country. I think, and then before we jump into the next section, is just I think the concept of freedom and fairness is overwrought. I think that capitalism creates a system of fairness in while being unfair, because the human condition is unfair. There are some people that are more able-bodied than others. There are some people that are more intelligent than others. There's some, excuse me, there's some people that are more blessed from an opportunity or luck perspective than others. Does that mean that it's unfair? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know the answer to that question. But the best way to handle it is to really just look at, in my view, I think is to look at a bit of a mix, which I think socialism, or some mix of socialism and socio-capitalistic society is probably the best way versus communism. We've got two comments that I'll just go through before we just quickly jump into the next one. So the first is Udo Chisom, welcome back. It's always good to have you, Udo. But some will argue that capitalism supports free markets. You mentioned greed, however, the capitalists will say, I'm not stopping anyone from entering the markets and making their own profits. Have you got any thoughts on that, Jam?
Yeah, no, okay. So is there free market though? Because I haven't seen any free markets. Yeah, free markets only work to the extent that it benefits the West or the people who are in charge of the system. As the moment there is competition or there's a chance that they might lose, free market stops working. And you can see this in how Trump has come in with his trade wars against China and imposing all these tariffs and all that. And in case somebody says, "Oh, it's just Trump," but it wasn't actually, because before him, Biden was doing the same thing. So So no, there is no such thing as free market. I think that when they talk about this free market, these are just, to me, slogans that they use to force the rest of us to believe that the system is fair. But that is whilst they are winning. Yeah. So it creates the illusion that this system is quite fair. But as soon as they start winning or there's serious competition, then free market just disappears. So no, actually the market isn't free. People interfere all the time in the market, and they control the markets.
I agree. I think the idea of a free market is the laissez-faire concept of let the markets do what they will. I think the opposite side is having a fully communist system where you have a fully structured, it's all communist. There's no market intervention. There is no control. There's no flexibility around supply and demand. I think that neither exists. I don't think it's a system that exists that has full free markets. In terms of capitalism, it just doesn't exist. The same way there's no full communism where that exists. It always has to be a bit of a mix. You can't have a free market without government intervention, and you can't have a fully communist environment without capitalistic intervention, in my view. To that point. And next comment pops in from Udo as well, from Chisom. Shout out to you. In China, the state is the capitalist. Agreed. No nation has achieved pure communism. I agree. This is my point exactly. In China, that's exactly what happens. The state is the capitalist. They push a system where they're able to maximize competition or optimize that system of ensuring that they have competition. And they utilize the umbrella of communism to cover up their own objectives and the things that they're trying to achieve as a country. 100% agree with that. There's no nation that achieved pure communism without lots of debt or failure.
I think, okay, I don't want to say I agree or disagree, but and this is why. So I would argue that China is a communist country, and what I mean by this is that and yes, you are right. There are, it's got what we might describe as sort of, market economy, and it's making loads and loads and loads of billionaires and all that. But the impulse of China is socialism and communism. So what they do, and you would see if you listen to their 5-year plan, which they review every year, and you hear Xi Jinping talking about common prosperity and common, yeah. So that is the kind of thing I'm talking about, and they do realize, obviously, there is inequality and all of those things, but these are things that they try to get on top of. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to give you an example, in the West, the corporations basically run the US and the UK and EU and all these other countries, right?
Well,
Because,
no,
well,
well,
yeah, no,
okay.
no. So you can look at our media, you can look at um, um, things like, why didn't we make much progress with, let's say, all this climate change and all of those things. But when you've got all these oil companies making the decisions, you're just not going to make far. But stay with me. So what you will find, though, in China is that the billionaires don't have that power to lobby the government and make decisions for the government, right? You remember, yes, the guy like Jack Ma, once he started to fancy himself, he's gone almost totally mute. So China doesn't let that
Yes, he
happen.
got arrested. That he kind of just disappeared.
Yeah, you don't have that power in China. The billionaires are subsumed within the state. They follow what the
But you
state
can
wants.
become a billionaire, though.
Hmm?
But you can become a billionaire in a true capitalist
Yeah,
economy.
no. So you
Sorry,
can,
a
but
true
this,
communist
yeah,
environment, you can.
yeah, no, but so I am saying it's communist because then what the Chinese government is trying to do is obviously to prioritize wealth distribution, and that is something that we need in this country, but it can't happen because we're a capitalist society, right?
The UK,
So, mhm.
the UK is capital. I absolutely do not think the UK is capitalist economy. I do not think the UK at best is socialist. America significantly more capitalist. The
No.
UK best is socialist. The
So
UK does so much to equalize wealth across individuals, across people here. There's no way I can look at the UK and say it's a capitalist economy 100%. There's no
okay.
chance.
So, I mean, you can look this up, but the UK is neoliberal. It's an example of, I think, if you're going to count the US, maybe next after US in terms of neoliberal policies, you'll probably be looking at the UK, and this obviously goes back to the relationship between Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, right? Which is, you privatize everything, you smash the unions, yeah. You deregulate, you weaken the so all of those things are neoliberal policies, and the UK, it's kind of why we are where we are at the moment, and I was saying to you, we haven't built any reservoirs, we haven't invested in infrastructure, we're not dumping sewage in. We are like the US, we're just not on speed as much as the US is. But if you're talking about neoliberal policies, if you mention the US, I think next you're going to have to be mentioning the UK. And yes, there are socialist projects in the UK, which are, well, actually most of Europe, which started soon after the Second World War, such as the NHS that we have. So yes, that's still a system, a communal.
The NHS automatically tells you that the UK is not a capitalistic
No,
economy.
it is.
It's capitalist to a degree, but it's socialist. Or is it social?
The UK is a new
economy.
no. So there are aspects of socialism within the UK that you can point to, and I've given a good example with the NHS. However, the UK is a capitalist country. It's a super capitalist country.
I just don't, with the taxation system in place. I mean, we can probably even have a whole different topic now.
Okay, let's stay with the capitalist system. Do you know about the City of London?
Yes,
Okay,
I
what do you
understand
know about the City of London?
What specifically? Because that is a big topic in itself.
So the City of London is a very tiny area in London, right? It's autonomous.
Yes.
The king or the queen is not the leader. there. It's autonomous. It's got its own economic system. It's got its own. They have like little ceremonies that sometimes you actually even do, but it's completely on its own, and it's
I'm
linked
not sure
with.
about that.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't,
You can look it up. You can look it up.
I don't know if the City of London is external to the rest of the United
It
Kingdom.
is. It is. It is.
Okay,
It's
I would
autonomous.
have to
Yeah,
look that one up
yeah,
because
yeah. You
I've
can look
never
it
heard
up.
about that before.
Yeah, you can look it up.
Yeah.
And it's got its own, financial system. It's with it's got its own jurisdiction, and it's important when you want to then start to understand all the offshoring of wealth that people do. Right?
Mhm.
Nobody knows how much money is hidden in all this offshore tax because you're not allowed to know. Right? You don't
You
have.
can't know anyway, just based off of the different legislative
No, no,
systems across the different
no,
countries
no,
in
no.
the world involved in it. So
If we can fly people to outer space, I'm sure we can know. We don't want to know. That's why we don't know.
oh yeah, well, yes, it's one of those things where it's like, well, okay, even if you know, it's one of those issues of, well, what difference does that make?
Okay,
Of
so
course,
no, because we're talking about the wealth redistribution, that is why it is relevant, right?
there are
So
always systems around, even within communism. If you, I mean, I know you've read, you must have read Animal Farm. There are systems of communism that abrogate responsibility and
okay, no,
change
but
the
no,
system
but
around.
I am trying to answer your question because you're changing the subject now. So your
I'm trying
question
not to.
is,
I was just trying to point out that you can that within all systems there are
yeah,
ways to escape them, but it doesn't mean that that system in itself
okay.
accounts
So
for X, Y,
I
Z or
don't know. I
offsets
don't know
X,
that
Y, Z.
you can. I don't know that you can say the same thing about China. If you know it, please let me know. And again, the reason
Mhm.
China is so important is that China offers us an alternative. It makes us see that this system isn't something that was just handed down from heaven. You can actually develop a different system, and the
Where you
system.
arrest and you make billionaires disappear.
Okay, no, let's go back to the subject because we will get
And then
distracted.
we're going sideways.
Yeah,
Let,
you're going to force me
let's
to.
move on to the
No,
next section because
no, but
we're
one
already,
second, please. One
so.
second, 1 second, because you're talking about the tax system. That
Mhm,
tax system allows people like you and I, who are, I don't know, middle income, the
mhm,
middle class, to be taxed to allow the
mhm.
system to run, so that the people who are on the lower rung, who or people who are unemployed, can have social benefit, which I completely fully support. Right,
I
and
don't. I don't fully support. I support
no, no,
aspects of it, but I definitely do not fully support it. I do
okay,
not
but
support
stay
people who
with
are on
me because
benefit that are
we
getting
are going to get distracted.
£36,000 a year. That to me is bonkers. Why is someone who's on benefits and they're going on the news and going on TikTok and talking about how they've been able to game the system to get
Yeah,
£36,000 a year?
okay. So, but I'm going to stay on the subject because
Mhm.
I could respond to that and we're going to get distracted. But I'm going somewhere with this. So
Yeah.
that what I'm trying to explain is that the people who can get taxed are the people who are kind of middle class. Yeah. If you're earning above, let's say, 150 in this country, for instance,
Mhm.
the government is going to tax your ass. And you're not going to be a person who is rich, right? The money is going
Over
to
a
have to go
hundred.
to
It's over a
HMRC.
hundred. From over a
Yeah.
hundred. It's
But
like getting
yeah,
taxed within. Yeah.
okay. But how about those trillions that are hidden in those City of London and all of these overseas tax havens that I was talking about? That nobody knows how much is there. Nobody has access to them. Nobody wants to know it. So, if the government wants to sort out the problem of, let's say, redistribution, because that is the conversation you are not allowed to have. You are not allowed
Yeah.
in this country to start to talk about how can we redistribute wealth, how can we tackle these issues. That is a subject that is off limit. Nobody wants to know about that. But that conversation is different in places like China. That's the point I'm trying to make, which is that the billionaires don't have the power that they have in the West. And for that reason, that is part of the thing that you
I
have
don't
China
100%
is
agree. I don't think it's I just don't think there's evidence for that. I don't know what the situation is politically in China to be able to make that determination. I don't know if, say, someone like, Jack Ma had an issue with somebody in government that caused him to get into whatever situation he got into. We don't know. And this is the issue I've got with communism as well. There are people in power. that we don't have any control over, because there's an authoritarian system in place that's decided by the few to determine who is in
It's not
control.
the Chinese Communist Party alone has over 100 million members.
Versus how many people in the entire country?
No, that's just that party. And if you have 100 million people, you are going to have a wide range of decisions. You can look at the Labour Party here in the UK. You know, how many wings do you
I
have?
don't know if you're going to have a wide range of decisions if you've got a country that has nearly 2. Is it 2 billion? What's the population of China today? I don't know the population. I don't know off the top of my head.
It's about 1.2 billion. It's about 1.2 billion people, right?
Yeah.
So
1.2. I thought it was closer to 2 billion at this point.
No. There's no such. No. It's about 1.2 billion.
Isn't India the one at 1.2?
It may have been overtaken by India now as the most populous country, but it's about 102 billion people. So the easiest way to remember it is think of 1.2 billion people. Think China. Think India. Think the population of Africa. Roughly, that's kind of what you're looking at there. So, but yes. So if you have 100 million people, of course you're going to have people who disagree. So it really isn't. So again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier when we started this, which is that a lot of people do not know. The people who criticize communism are the people who know the least about it or are interested in finding out. So yes, you may not understand the Chinese system, but you couldn't then start to criticize the Chinese system when you don't know what the system is. The thing to do there is to try and find
the implementation of a system is different from the ideology. So I can criticize an ideology without necessarily criticizing the implementation of that ideology, which, for example, in this case, when we think about China, I do not think that China has implemented a communist system. It's not a communist system. They've got a mixed system, which is a combination of capitalism. To Chisholm's comments that he raised earlier, it's a combination of capitalism and communism. They utilize communism for the people, but they implement capitalism when it suits them. I think we should just go to the next topic, just to understand the next subtopic, just in the interest of time, to look at, because there's two other things, this and one other one that we should talk about. This in terms of what it does to people, but then the last thing around which one actually works. But maybe we can start with this. What does communism, what does capitalism do to the actual people involved in these different systems? And just maybe we can have a bit of a powwow about what we think about these ones. Do you want to go first, or have a view? Because there's basically, it's like 3 subsections I'm thinking about with this one around, well, do capitalist systems turn everything and everybody into products? I think that's an important one to understand, especially in the age of AI with Google over the past couple of years, Gmail, Yahoo as well, with the web searches and everybody signing up, etc. Does it turn us into products? Are we the product that now starts being sold versus actually having products being sold? But also on the other side, does communism itself kill ambition, innovation, and creativity? And we can answer these questions a bit honestly. And then we can also maybe dive in a little bit into how do both systems shape identity, purpose, and relationships between people? Because very often we don't really think about these things. Do you have any initial thoughts?
Yeah, no. I like the subheading. So yes, capitalism looks at you in terms of commodity. That is, you have to understand that. And again, the logic is very easy to follow. If you understand that it's about profit or profit seeking, it just makes sense. Everything is seen from that lens and from that perspective. And we've discussed this quite a few times in terms of, let's say, women, for instance. We've mentioned this, why women are different from men, and how the system looks at that, and how even when they are recruited into the labor market, and so everything is commoditized. And even the idea of beauty, it's all about profit again and commodity. And the idea that a certain definition of beauty, and these things are like on billboards, they are on TV, in day-to-day conversations, and it creates this what's the word I'm looking for? It almost a feeling of inadequacy, in women, and to try to fill that, somebody's there selling them beauty products, right? So that's, do you see where I'm coming from? So
Yeah,
that's
100%.
yeah. So yes, the human capitalism looks at when it looks at you, it looks at commodity, basically, and how they can make money, how you can make money out of you.
Right.
I think that when you look at socialism, I think that it's probably thinking how do we enhance the well-being of the community, and I think it's a totally different mindset. That's it, it really is very important. So whereas capitalism is thinking how do I maximize my profit, the socialists are thinking how do I make life better for everybody. And
Yep.
for me, it's no brainer which one I would choose, because yeah, if me and my neighbors and my sisters and my brothers and my everybody can have access to lights, to water, to safe drinking water, and we can all prosper, well, personally, I don't need the billions. I don't want to have all these billions. If my neighborhood is going to be safe, mental health is going to be low, everybody is healthy, I'm ill, I can get good health, my kids can go to good school, the neighborhood is safe.
Yeah.
I don't need the billions, right? But in the
Mhm.
capitalist system, the people who can think, I feel safe, are the people who've got the billions, because they can't they live in a totally in gated communities, in massive mansions, totally detached from the rest of us. They fly in, helicopters and private jets and yachts, and
Mhm.
they don't know what's happening with the rest of society, because they've got they've got that they can afford to be distant from the rest of society. So they're just totally not interested in what the rest of us do. And they might make token gestures, and I don't know, maybe donate to charity or whatever it is, type of thing, give a small amount of money just so that people can get off their backs. And do you know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
so that's so that's how I would look at it. And then the second point that you mentioned was about
Does communism kill ambition, innovation, and creativity?
yeah. So no, so I think that is absolute nonsense. I disagree. And if you
Mm.
let's even go back to USSR, because if I use China, you're going to say, oh no, 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 we can't. It's and all that, right? So when USSR was USSR, when it was communist, hopefully you would agree that it was communist, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Yeah. So did they not put man on the moon? They developed the military and the economy. And remember, as much as you can talk about its own internal contradictions and all the difficulties it had, it was actually also the entire West was working to also undermine it, because as a system that was going to compete with it, they didn't want to see a system that was different. So they worked studiously to try and undermine and destroy the communist system. So yes, it did crash. And not long ago, I was on holiday to Croatia, and I got talking to people who, because it was part of former Yugoslavia, and you would know that that was a communist country, socialist
Mhm.
country that NATO and America went and bombed and bombed and bombed and bombed, right? Because they didn't want any alternative from capitalist system. It's the same reason why they're attacking China now, because they cannot stand a system that is different from theirs. Because if that happens, if people free themselves from the shackle of capitalism, because it's a system of extraction and exploitation, if there's nobody to exploit, then you can't have that money. And if you can't have that money, you can't have this lifestyle that we all enjoy, which is subsidized by the suffering of people across the world. So I was asking people, what all the people who have known both sides, and the socialist times and now, and a couple of them said to me that yeah, they do miss it, because right now it seems that the government is just all interested in um, um, so to give an example, they're like, oh, as this place now is all just tourism, and it's short for like, I don't know, 3 4 months or so in a year. Nothing happens, there's no
Mhm.
activity. Yeah. And when these tourists come during the season, they come in this massive cruise ships, and it's like 5,000 people suddenly land in your tiny area, right? Gridlock, traffic, nobody can move.
Yeah.
They come with their foods anyway, so they just go to like the souvenir area maybe and just look around. Some of them just want to take photos. They're not really interested in like learning about the people, learning about the place, and then off they go. And then 2 hours later, another 5,000 people. So they are sick of it, and they talk about the times when they had free health and free education and all of those things. So, so to answer your question, no, I disagree that communism is against innovation. That is a lie again that people are told to misinform them and to miseducate them about what communism or socialism are all about, and it's deliberate. And I think your final point, again, I think your final point about relationships.
How do both systems shape identity, purpose, and relationships?
Yeah. I think that is quite straightforward, isn't it? Because the capitalist system is quite individual. You remember that Margaret Thatcher said words to the effect that there is no community, there's just individuals. There's no society, there's just individuals. So, and they make you think that, and this is why it's so difficult to also mobilize people and to unionize, because they give you the impression that if you're not successful, it's your cup of tea, it's your business, it's your fault, it's because you haven't worked hard, right? And it doesn't talk about all of the because, like I said, it's you've got to think of it as a system of exploitation. If you've got a pie, if you've got a cake, and somebody's got 90% of that cake, and the remaining 100 of you have to share whatever is left, the 10%, right? The problem isn't that there wasn't cake, it was just that somebody was greedy and took 90%, right? So the richer somebody is in general, it means that the poorer somebody else is going to be, because it's a system of exploitation. And people have to try and understand that.
Okay, so I'm going to go from the other perspective, because I think I completely disagree with you on everything that you've said, and I think there's some areas I might agree out of kindness of my heart, but generally speaking, I disagree with you on a lot of it. So let's talk about the cake. Before you can even start sharing the cake, you need to bake it. To bake that cake, you require interest, you require people to bring the ingredients, you require people to care about the quality of the cake. You need people to design that cake, you need people to actually come up with the concept of what that cake should be. You will not get that under communism, because what you will get is a system. And to your point that you said previously about ambition and innovation and creativity, I disagree with you as well. So the ambition, the innovation and creativity to bake that cake.
I'm sorry. Let me interrupt you. What is it that you agree with me? Did the Russians or the Soviets, did they fly?
That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
You just talk about innovation. You're saying
I'll tell you why it doesn't matter. So innovation, ambition, and creativity don't rely on governmental policies or international politics. It's not about whether or not America. There was the international arms race for a while. Then there was the space race, which was an actual thing, which was governmental policy. What does that have to do with creativity, innovation, or ambition? Nothing to do with any of that stuff. It's the governments and these countries.
You're contradicting yourself.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not contradicting myself. Google did not come out. No. Okay. Google did not come out because the governments were arguing amongst themselves on the best search engines. It came out because somebody had an idea based off of the ambition, creativity.
So you're saying to me now, you're saying to me, flying somebody to the moon, and by the way, the Soviets actually got there before the entire capitalist West.
I know. Right? They had Lucy, the dog that went. I don't care. It's not relevant to this conversation.
No, but
it doesn't have anything to do with
it's absolutely
innovation.
Relevant.
okay, so okay, you raise your point. Let me go and tackle the points that you're raising and why they're not particularly relevant. Ambition is not relevant to this. Ambition, creativity, innovation tend to go hand in hand in terms of coming up with new things, not necessarily policy prescribed concepts. So in this case, there's an international space race that was going on. So governmental policy defined what creativity would be. That's not how creativity works. Creativity comes before the definition of the output. So the things that we've been able to create, Facebook did not come from government from governments mandating what we need a new way to be able to interact with each other. That's not what happened. Instagram, picture sharing thing, although Instagram has become a bit of a hellhole at this point, but the concept of Instagram and how people interact, WhatsApp, text messaging, well, kind of, text messaging was kind of governmental to a degree, but all of these concepts have not necessarily grown out of government mandates. They've grown from personal ambition and individual creativity and the things that they wanted to do. So the idea that the government, because, hold on one second, the idea that because the government was able to push people to provide value in a specific governmental program does not negate the fact that ambition, creativity, and innovation are often very independent things that have nothing to do with governments telling you what you should be creative, innovative, or ambitious about. People have their own things, and if they have an incentive on what they should deliver value on, it makes them more able to be able to deliver on those things. And that's the challenge that I push back to communism, because communism says we have XYZ thing to deliver on. Go and be ambitious and creative and innovative about it. It's like, well, that's not how that works. That's the wrong way around. You need to sit down in your house and think about, there's a specific thing I want to do, and this thing is going to deliver value, and I'm going to do it, rather than the government telling you what a thing is going to be, and then you figure out how to make that thing happen. That's the issue I've got with communism, and that's one of the biggest problems, I think, that generally, when we think about the far left ideologies, disrupts the entire concept around them. That's my thing. So that's the first one. The second part.
Do you think this is one of those
situations? Okay. So, yeah, if you note that down, we can tackle it. The second part is about, we're talking about selling yourself. So generally, and this was one of the first things that you raised about selling yourself. And we talked about this already, that the capitalist systems turn everything and everyone into a product. Yes, I agree. I think that everybody is a product and everybody can be sold. The challenge that I've got with this is that selling yourself for a price is a price that you agree on. So I agree that I am worth X. If I want to be on Facebook and to have access to people, I'm going to sell some bits around my identity or my persona, etc., to ad agencies who are going to. And this is just opening up. I don't know if this is 100% true, because I don't want to end up getting into any palaver with Facebook or anybody like that. But it's one of those things where it's like you sell yourself for a price that you agree. You look at the terms and conditions. I don't know what they are right now, but the terms and conditions say we're going to use your likeness, we're going to target you with ads, etc. I choose to be sold as a product versus a situation in which, in the communist environment, that you are sold for a price that you don't agree on. You are determined that you should be XYZ within this area. Again, I'm talking about the communist theology or ideology versus the actual implementation, which in most cases is not going to be a true communist implementation. Within communism, you're determined to be what you should be, and you're put into that category based on your capability. I do not necessarily have as much choice as I would. I can choose to be that product, and I can choose which product maximizes my personal value. And then using the Adam Smith invisible hand theory about where I can provide value. If the invisible hand theory, to those who don't understand what it is a theory that basically says, it's an economic theory. Adam Smith, the father of economics, etc., whatever you want to call him, basically said that something along the lines, I can't remember the exact words, the exact words that were used, that as a person, if I'm a butcher and then I chop my meat, when I go to the market to sell it, someone is going to buy it. Someone is going to give. If I go to the market and I want shoes, I can take meat as a butcher to the market, and somebody will give me shoes for my meat. because I've decided what it is that I think that I can provide to the market, and then somebody has decided that that thing provides value, and I can exchange that value. Everything that we do right now in the world is dependent on this. And I think this is one of the big things that communism loses. Within communism, you're not able to select what your value is. You don't choose your value. You don't necessarily choose what it is that you're capable of doing. You're not going to be as innovative. You're not going to be as creative in terms of what it is that you need to deliver or what it is that you want to do. And you're not going to be as ambitious because you know that there's no class. You know there's nowhere for you to move up to. And you're stuck within the system that's been created to constrain you to a specific area of value, to the wider society. I'm not saying this is 100% bad. And this is the important part as well for me. It's more about the fact that as a society, somebody, the state, is determining what your value is. And once we have a situation like that, people lose interest. If I was in a system where I was being told what my value should be, you know what, Cross, you're pretty good at computing, or you're very good in terms of this IT infrastructure thing. But actually, we think you're a lot better in carpentry because you've been going to the gym a lot, so you can probably push all that stuff. I'm not going to be anywhere as productive or as useful in terms of, or certainly not as creative or as ambitious as I am now in moving into carpentry. Do you know what I mean? And then the final point as well is about the cake sharing, because you talked about the cake.
Where has that happened?
Final point, really, really short, is the cake sharing. You talked about the cake sharing. The final point about cake sharing is, in order to share the cake, you need to bake that cake. How big that cake ends up being depends on the ambition, creativity, determination, and focus of those people who bake that cake. They're not going to be as ambitious, determined, creative, etc. under communism as they would be under capitalism. It doesn't mean there won't be a cake. It just won't be as nice a cake.
Okay. So I think you make a lot of assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of these assumptions are incorrect. And the only thing I would say is yourself. And yeah, we learn every day. And I used to hold a lot of these positions that you hold today. I think that, I'm not giving you an assignment. I'm encouraging you to spend a little time and maybe
my internet just went out for a second. Okay. I'm back now, I think.
Yeah, no. I was just saying that I'm encouraging you and our listeners to maybe spend some time to try and understand.
No, tell me specifics. No, I don't like the broad spectrum, because that's the I am holier than thou. I can tell you that there's things that you don't know. Give me specifics. I want specifics, because I am an economist. I know all of these theories, and I want to hear your specific.
So I think, like I said, I think you are making a lot of assumptions. So some of these assumptions that you made. Okay. So I mentioned about the Soviets going to space, outer space, or landing. You've completely dismissed that, and
I did not dismiss it. I challenged it.
Okay, because
I said international politics and the space race does not affect the governmental policy, and I specifically focused on that one. That government policy about a specific thing that the government wants to do does not mean that the people themselves are still allowed to be creative or to be ambitious. The government has decided this is a thing that's interesting to us. So they went to space. What happened after that? We've not done anything with it. Went to the moon. Who cares? We've not done anything with any of that stuff. It was useless. We didn't gain anything from it. And that's even more points. That's more points to what I'm saying. That the government directed talent, capability, revenue, resources to things that would not have been under a capitalistic environment because it delivered no value.
Okay, I'm just challenging your notion that capitalism is anti-innovation, because that is clearly, and I know you're trying to wriggle yourself out of this.
Communism. I'm not wriggling anything.
Communism,
I know exactly what I'm talking about.
So, okay, so I think that is, you're factually incorrect there. Okay, so
how? Please tell me.
They had. I've already given examples, and that's
no. You need to be specific. I want to hear specifics.
Let me.
How am I incorrect?
You need to hear me out.
And you can go back. We can go back on the replay and listen to what I said. I said specifically that the space race was a governmental, international space race between governments who manufactured this. I'm adding this manufactured part because I need to be very clear in case it wasn't clear. Who have manufactured a competition of creativity. It's not about creativity that was useful to the people. Nobody cares about who's gone to space. It's not done anything for us right now. We've been to the moon, so what? We've not been to the moon since 1960, what, 67 or 69? I can't remember last time.
By the way, it's not. I know I mentioned the moon. It's not the moon, okay? But okay.
I know space. It was Lucy went to space. I know that. I was just pointing out the fact that the space race ended up somewhere, and no one cares.
Okay, so let's put it this way. I disagree with you. I think that space technology is very important, and they demonstrate their excellence in that area. You know,
how is it important? Tell me how it's important.
But you need to let me finish. Okay, so they excelled in education. You know, healthcare was free for their people. In culture, the Soviet helped to liberate, you know, Africa and most parts of the third world by supporting our movement against, you know, colonialism. So they achieved quite a lot, and their society was prosperous. And yes, it was undermined by forces external to that. Plus, you know, so and because if I use Russia, you're going to start. I mean, China. I beg your pardon. You're going to start to say, "Oh, it's not communist." I would argue that China is communist. I know you're going to disagree.
You can't say, come on, you can't say communist. Let me finish.
No, let me finish.
Come on, man. How do you say China is communist? It's not communist. It's not. It's capitalist.
China is a communist country, and so there are possibilities. There are things that. Why do you think they're trying to undermine the Chinese? Why?
Because they're capitalists, and they're better than the West at being capitalist. That's the point.
No. If they were, hang on, stay there a second. Okay, if they were capitalist, they will be holding their hands and being like, "Well done, you have demonstrated for all to see how brilliant capitalism is." Right? The capitalist countries have either stagnated, right? Actually, all of them, the economies are not growing. They've all actually stagnated the last 40, 50 years since they adopted neoliberal policies, which is extreme form of capitalism. Things have stagnated. Inequality has risen. Wages have stagnated. You know, all these are realities of countries in EU and maybe with a small exception of America because it's the hegemon. So no, I disagree with you. You know, if they would love to, if China were capitalist, right? Today, these countries would be singing and being like, China proves how fantastic capitalism is and all of those kind of things. They don't say that, do they? They don't say that. They keep saying, they tell you, communist China. China is...
Yeah, because it's propaganda. I'm not taking the words.
No, but China
is taking the words of the government.
China
as gospel. It's only when it's good.
Yes.
And you know, Jab, no, hang on, Jab. No, wait, what am I even saying? Jab, you know this. You know this better than most
people. Let me finish my point.
Your background understands this, that government propaganda, you know government propaganda. You know that governments give all these nonsensical adjectives, labels, etc., to different things that they want to push their own propaganda against. You cannot turn and be on the side of the governments giving propaganda.
No.
And tell me propaganda. No. Jab, are you propagandizing me? Come on, Jab. Let's look at the comments really quickly. So some would argue that the equality that communism promises has never worked in practice. I agree. That it is a utopia. It's a utopia. Which country has attempted to practice communism without devolving into dictatorship? I 100% agree. Animal farm. You take that into consideration. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. 4 legs good, 2 legs better. That is what it eventually turns into. That is the world that we exist. Jab, have you got any thoughts on this one?
I think this is going to require a conversation for another day. But what I would say is this: because around here now, what Udo Chisholm is trying to explore is the idea of freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is how I look at it.
Mm-hmm.
If I am ill, let's take the US for instance. If I'm ill and I am worried about my health and I
Mm-hmm.
can't get health care and I have to sell my house or not go to the hospital because I can't afford it and just suffer and die, I would
Mm-hmm.
argue that that is not freedom. Okay?
Extreme capitalism. I don't agree that extreme capitalism is the way forward. I don't agree. Extreme communism is the same thing. But to
So
Chisholm's
are you
comment.
letting me finish or are you going to
Sorry,
answer?
sorry. I thought you finished. Sorry, my bad. Go on.
Okay. So I won't argue. So I would argue that that is not freedom. If you go to China, the things that we consider freedom, I don't know what example might I use, or let's even say, let's say, okay. So you might say, oh, you can wear your bikini maybe on the beach, type of thing, and that's fine, yeah. And so that's freedom, and we need to fight to defend that freedom. Let's say in China they say, I don't know, what example can I use in China? Okay, so put it this way. So in China, I've got access. I'm not worried about my health. I've got good housing. I've got water. I've got. I can go wherever I want because there are actually tons of videos of people Westerners, who have gone to China and have done video and been like, this is nothing compared to what we've been told. So you
Mm-hmm.
can move around freely, and they do vote. And yes, it's the CCP that is in power, has been for like the last 40, 50, 67 years. I can't remember, of 70 years maybe off the top of my head. But
Authoritarian.
hmm? Yeah,
Authoritarians. Yeah.
no, I don't think it's authoritarian. I think that the
I'm
best
just
way
throwing.
to
Sorry, go on. I'm just throwing
no,
in.
no,
It
no,
doesn't
but
mean that you.
the best way to understand the CCP and the Chinese model is to
Mm-hmm.
think of it in terms of meritocracy, because that is the system that is there. Yeah. So it's a system that privileges people who are able and capable and have shown demonstrable evidence that they can manage people and manage affairs of the state. That's the system that they've got there. So
Yep.
I mean, I would say that the system that I would say that the Chinese enjoy greater freedom than we have here. So there are many things that you're not allowed to say here about the government. You can't take Israel, for instance. There's some things that you just can't say about Israel. If you criticize the government of Israel, I don't mean Jews,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be called an anti-Semite. And, people are going to destroy your career, type of thing. You know,
Yep.
that is just one random example, for instance. So
Mm-hmm.
this idea that we have more freedom than the Chinese do, I just think that is a complete illusion. People do not understand what that is what we've been indoctrinated to believe. And so we keep repeating these things. Again, it goes back to that video that he showed at the start, which is that people have very strong opinions about things that they don't understand. Me, I am trying to learn, and I go beyond what people write in the media and stuff that I hear, and I investigate things for myself. And what I am finding from this analysis and from this study is actually that a lot of the stuff that I'm being fed is just not correct. So that's how I roll.
I think you should be a bit careful with assuming that people don't know what they're talking about, because it's the same thing that Kwame had a good point, but he was in the university during that speech where he was talking about to a few young people. I think the idea that people don't know what they're talking about is a bit risky. I prefer to err on the side of assuming that people know what they're talking about, because it's easy to come across patronizing and completely missing the mark in terms of people's knowledge. Next comment coming in: USSR or Russia have never landed a man on the moon. Agreed. Why did they not land a man on the moon? It wasn't relevant. Nobody cared. It was not that important. It wasn't ambitious. There was no point in doing it. Shout out to Chisom on this one. And shout out to a new first comment from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Didn't realize that we're getting that much reach. Big hug from Buenos Aires, Argentina. Big hug right back to you. You have a few comments here that I am trying to work through, and I'll sort that out and get that through. But he or she is basically explaining the problem with bureaucracy, and that having a working class democracy solves it, and more massive than bureaucrats' narratives. Going down the Trotsky route, going down Trotsky route. If you can collate, Nacho, if you can collate your thoughts in a very simple format, that would be really helpful, just so I can put something on the screen that we can relate to. So the final section is just really this, and this is what we've been talking about already anyway, about what system actually works. Do you want me to go first, Jab, or do you want to go? Go for it, actually.
No, you go for it. Go for it.
I think in my view, based off the summary of the conversations that we had and based off the different things that we've seen, I think that I don't think either works. I don't like capitalism. I think it's absolute, forgive my French, dog shit. I'm not a fan of it. I don't like it. I don't think capitalism in the purest form in which it exists in certain countries around how you're able to go out there to do what you want and be able to provide the kind of value that you want in the way that you want it. The unconstrained levels of ambition is a problem, because the human mind, especially some very specific types of people, and they call this A-type personality, and there's other things that you break that down into. They're very specific individuals who are very driven to very specific outcomes and will do anything that it takes to get to that outcome, regardless of the impact on other people or on Earth. And when they get to the point where they have the control of resources, they can actually impact what happens on Earth. Whether we're talking about global warming, which we can have a conversation about that, but I don't necessarily agree that that's real or not. I'm waiting to be convinced. We're talking about the resource sharing across different types of resource, whether it be food, whether it be different things like lithium that's being shared, etc. And in terms of the political power that financial independence from capitalism has created, is this something that we want? So does capitalism work? No. Communism, again, I can't use any of the extant systems of communism to discuss how communism works, because I do not believe China is communist. I just don't. I don't see any evidence for it. We've got too many billionaires for it to be billionaires in dollars. I just can't say that that's communist. I just cannot say it's communist. There's some elements of it that are communist, but I just can't say it's very capitalistic. If you look at a lot of the things that have come out of China, they're capitalistic. They focus essentially on being able to maximize revenue, and it doesn't matter who it is that works for the organization. They don't focus on the things that most countries, or most communist countries focus on in terms of classless society and ensuring that there's equality around the distribution of resources, etc. I'm not seeing that when I look at China and a lot of the things that they've done, especially in the tech spaces. In the agrarian areas, they're a bit more communist. But when you think about the tech spaces in China, nobody's going to be able to convince me. Well, maybe somebody can. Someone can come up with something different to convince me that China is actually a bit different. But in the tech space, China appears to act in a highly capitalistic capacity, which makes me just question whether or not that that they are communistic. And if I go back to the communist ideology, I think, in my view, I think socialism, or a degree of socialism, is probably the best output. It's probably the best way. It's probably the only system that works. If we could have a system, there's a bit of a mishmash between both, where we have communism in terms of sharing resources from the very rich. I have to be careful with this when I say it, so I'm not hypocritical. But it needs to be a system that allows sharing, not necessarily through taxation, maybe through ownership, maybe through some other systems. But we need a system that allows the community ownership of ideas. I'm not necessarily sure how this works. And then maybe as this podcast evolves, as me and you talk, because I think I learned a lot from you, to be honest, because we've had a few podcasts where we'll talk, and the things that you say, I would absorb. And I've been, we've had a few. I've told you straight up that I've changed my mind about one or two things. I'm absorbing them, and then maybe there's a possibility that I might be able to think about a new system that works to deliver the kind of world that we want. But at this point, I think socialism tends to be where it is. It's a combination, for those who are listening. It's a combination of communism and capitalism, where there's some limited, and this is what I think China is actually operating. China is more socialist than it is communist, where we're operating a socialist capacity where there's limited ownership within the private area of money, of land, of capital, etc. But then the government also is involved in terms of controlling how we interact, the legal aspects of things, taxation, etc. And we are not losing the ability to push for innovation, ambition, and creativity. I think we need a bit of a mishmash, and we're hopefully going to get there when we eventually come up with a few more changes with how we're interacting. Jab, what do you think?
Okay, so I think, excuse me, I have been using communism, socialism kind of interchangeably, but I'm not going to change that. So we'll just carry on because we're nearly at the end now. But let me say what it is not, because I've heard you say China, for instance, has millionaires, therefore it cannot be socialist. It's not that, it cannot be communist or socialist. That is not really the definition of socialist. In my mind, it's something to aspire to, right? In the same way that maybe democracy is something to aspire to. And it's the principle we're talking about here, which is who would own and control the means of production, right? So is it the people? Is it the people? Communist, socialist? That's what it means. That's where that root word comes from. Or is it an individual? So if it's an individual, just to recap what we've discussed so far, we are talking about capitalism. The issue with that is that when you leave power in the hand of an individual, it will be abused. It will get abused. Therefore, when profit seeking becomes the imperative, human suffering is not going to be far away, because you will destroy the climate. You would, because all you're going to do is just keep accumulating and accumulating and accumulating, and there's no end to accumulating this, wealth and money. And then you end up with a situation like I was describing earlier, which is that a few people, so take the US for instance, right? The top 1% of the US owns about, I think off the top of my head, somebody can please have a look, I think they own about 50% of the wealth of that country. Just the top 1%, 50%. Just let that sink in. That is insane. And that society is one of the most unequal societies in the developed capital West. The bottom 50, I think they only own about 0.2% of the wealth of the country. That is half the people. So it's a population of 350 million people. So you're saying about 180 million people own just 0.2% of the wealth of that country. That is not a system that anybody should be arguing for. we should be condemning that system. We should be saying destroy that system and get a new system, right? So when we talk about socialism or communism, we are saying we want a system that prioritizes the majority. So in this case, we want a system whereby 90% of the population or the wealth, 90% of the wealth of that society should be in the hand of the common people of everybody, right?
Mhm.
So we're not saying you can have if you've got if the top 1% own 0.1% of the wealth of the country, I would take that over the situation that we have in the US. So this is the thing that I keep saying, and this is why I still believe that China is a communist country, because yes, they may have used capitalist system to generate the wealth and innovation and all of those things. I'm not going to argue with you about that, because I'm more interested in driving home this point than arguing about this something like equity. But what they do, and they do very well, is to redistribute that wealth and prevent this inequality that I've just described that happens in the USA, such that now we know that in the last 40, 50 years, they have lifted nearly 1 billion people out of poverty, such that if you take out their contribution from global poverty alleviation, there has barely been any poverty alleviation in the world over the last 40 years. Why is that? Because if you're saying capitalism is this brilliant system, how is it that the rest of the world, which follows the US and the EU, the Western capitalist system, how is it that the last 40, 50 years, there has been no shift in poverty reduction if that system works well?
Mm. I think this is the important thing about capitalism that people often miss on the left side of the political spectrum, that capitalism is not designed to reduce poverty, but we keep talking about it like it does. It does not care about poverty. Capitalism cares about generating innovation, creativity, output, profit. So if you make money, if you make other people rich off the back of you doing that, congratulations. But only a side project. It's not the main thing. I think that's quite important to point out. But I think at this point we probably just go to last thoughts, because we
Okay,
haven't
so
had
let me quickly say something. Let me quickly say something in relation to that. So
Sure.
I think I'm inclined to agree with you, which is that capitalism is not interested in poverty alleviation.
Correct.
So you mentioned a few other things, but I would actually argue that it's only interested in profit. That's what capitalism seeks. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
Yes. So that's how I think. Because you said if you bake this
Why is
big
that
cake,
bad?
why is that bad? For all the reasons that I have described. Okay. So the trouble is that if it generates that profit, and I, as the government, then say, okay, we've generated, I don't know, £1 billion or whatever it is.
Mhm.
Where are we? First of all, where are we starting? We do not want a society where there's this massive inequality. And
Why not?
why
I'm
do we not?
asking now from the
Yes.
full-on theoretical level to say, okay, let's go back to the basics, peel this back to the back, and then why do we not want an unequal society?
So you probably will never have an equal society, but what you want to do is minimize the inequality gap.
Okay. How? To what end? What are we willing to risk with that reduction in inequality?
Well, okay. So if you've got an unequal society, what might go wrong? You're going to have to start to think about crime. People can't eat. People can't school their kids. They can't send their kids to school. You're going to have a very unrestful society. Crime
Yeah.
is going to go up. It's in the interest
For
of the
some
bourgeoisie.
people, yes, agreed.
Yeah. to make sure that, because yeah, they can hide in their bunkers and all that, but until the people have had enough, and they'll go find them, type of thing. So of course you don't want a society that is that unequal. In any case, why would you? Because this life that we have, if you live 100 years, you've done yourself really, really good, right? So why would we want a situation where some people in this short journey have a miserable existence? If we can make things better for them, and we've got the resources to do that. And in that example, Kwame Ture gave the example of the coal in the ground, right? It was, nobody worked to put that coal in the ground. It's there, right? So if we can extract that and use it to bring about development, and there's light, there's water, there's all of this, that's a good thing, isn't it, right? We don't want a few people saying this is our thing, and therefore they extract it and they just keep collecting rent and making themselves stupendously rich when some people are lacking. So that is the problem. If somebody is not eating and somebody is flying a private jet and hanging around in a yacht and just living obscenely, like I said, completely cut off from society, what good is that? I don't want a society like that.
I think we need to have a conversation separately as well. We can have an episode where we discuss living standards and the impact on economic systems. Well, maybe at this point we just go to last thoughts, just because of time. I'm keenly aware we've ended up being 2 hours, and this has been a very, very interesting conversation back and forth. But we can just, if we do last thoughts, do you want to go your last thoughts first, or do you want me to go back? You go first.
No, I think last thoughts. All I want to just say is I think, to summarize, I think the problem with capitalism is, if you reward greed and that's all you do, and you don't do anything to regulate it, definite there's going to be human suffering at the end of that. And I think socialism is where we should all aspire to be, human civilization, because that is a far superior system. Because Ubuntu, I am so you are, so I am, or is it I am so you are? I think that is a good thing if we've got common prosperity. If in your family somebody is ill or unwell, or they can't eat or they can't drink, even we see that even in animals, they go out of their way to help people. So I think that is a good place for us to aspire to, and that's for that reason. This is why I think I would say, let's build a socialist model, in the world. That's where we need to be aspiring to go.
Nacho seems to agree with you. My last thoughts would be, I think that capitalism and communism are both flawed models. I think they're designed in the standard economic principle of coming up with something that sounds perfect on paper, but when you implement it, it just doesn't work. Neither of them works. Capitalism doesn't work because it's designed on the concept of individual self-interest to the extreme level, where you could end up with somebody who is worth the top 10 people, I think, are worth 30% of the world's global value, which is just insane.
Exactly.
It's just silly. It's to the point where it's also really, 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 really silly. And then I think that communism causes some other issues in which there is zero motivation for people who are highly intellectual and highly gifted to be able to create a product or concept that would benefit them. Because we keep forgetting within communism that people also care about their own self-benefits. And then I think we need a bit of a balance between what works for us and for people individually and what works for society as a whole. And with these economic systems that we talk about, we tend to forget that. We tend to focus with a grandiose view about how it's all about the society or it's all about the individual. And we think about these two things. And then we miss the concept of, actually, it's a bit of a mix. It's in the middle. we need to care about ourselves, but care about others. We need to care about society, but we need to care about the individual, and then what it is that motivates individuals to be able to do the things that they do. And I think we need to think about a concept that still works on individual. Socialism came out as a bit of a concept, but I don't necessarily think that that is the answer. And I'm looking forward to figuring out which one it is. In terms of the question, which system actually wins, that's on the screen, I do not agree that capitalism wins, and I do not agree that socialism wins. I think we need to think a little bit deeper and try a few different concepts and come up with a few different answers to this question. And with that, I'm going to just put the last few questions on the screen. Nacho, thank you for joining us. Pollution, it's a permanent cost of reduction of the cost of production. It's almost a capitalist objection, like a Coca-Cola. All right, Nacho, thank you very much. Hola, Dotun Jones. Oh, sorry, this came first. I also wait, hang on. Jab, yes, so do I to a large extent. I also agree with Cross. A balance between both systems is ideal, and I agree with all of this. With that, I'd say, are there any closing remark from you, Jab, before we end?
No, I think Jones is a politician. He's given
political answers.
He's for everybody and he's for nobody.
Yes. Nacho, well, thanks. Bye. We're gonna go with you as well. Thank you very much for joining us for this stream. We've been a couple of weeks late on this. By the way, if you're watching, you're going to see a slightly different dip. We're going to start having a few different in-week interactions, a few changes around what's happening. We're going to have a midweek session where we'll be trying a few different things with different guests. But keep your eyes open. You'll see a few different things. But thank you very much for joining us today. Have a fantastic weekend and a fantastic week. Misaligned signing out.
Thank you all. Thank you.